Have you ever, joined a new company full of enthusiasm, ready to make a difference, only to find that your absolute best traits are suddenly a problem?
Right, like you walk in wanting to add value and suddenly you're the bad guy.
Exactly. Like asking smart questions or, I don't know, trying to improve a broken process or just maintaining really high standards. And suddenly you're being labeled as uh, being difficult or not being a team player.
It is a uniquely disorienting experience.
Yeah.
I mean, after a few months of that subtle pushback, you end up staring at your ceiling at 2 a.m., genuinely wondering if you are the problem.
Yes, that exact feeling.
Oof.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to help you, the listener, decode exactly what is happening in those moments.
Yeah, because it's a critical distinction to make.
Right. We're going to figure out whether your workplace struggles are due to a genuine skill gap on your end, or, and this is key, if you are caught in an environment that actively penalizes your talent.
And confusing a toxic environment for personal failing can genuinely derail your career trajectory. Not to mention, cause lasting damage to your mental health.
Totally. And we're pulling all of this from a really fascinating research paper by organizational psychologist Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. It's titled, When Competence Becomes a Liability.
It's such a brilliant framing of the issue.
It really is. I mean, being punished for doing your job well is like getting a speeding ticket for driving the exact speed limit.
Right.
You're following the rules, you're looking right at the speedometer, but the system pulls you over anyway, hands you a massive fine, and, well, makes you feel completely crazy.
What's fascinating here is that this feeling of going crazy isn't just you having a bad boss.
Right.
It is a documented psychological phenomenon.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, the research actually calls it competence pathologization. It's a specific mechanism of workplace toxicity where an employee's highly adaptive, competent behaviors are systematically reframed as character defects.
Okay, so when most of us hear the phrase toxic workplace, we immediately picture, the overt cinematic stuff, right?
The yelling and the throwing thing.
Exactly. The boss who yells across the bullpen, blatant harassment, obvious theatrical bullying. But this phenomenon sounds, much more subtle than that.
It is far more subtle, which is precisely why it is so insidious. With overt bullying, the victim can usually identify the behavior and, externalize the blame.
Right. If someone screams at you, you know the yeller is the problem.
Exactly. But this subtle erosion works by manipulating the narrative around your actual work. It takes behaviors that organizations desperately need, like critical thinking or pointing out massive inefficiencies, and reframes them as personal flaws.
So how does that actually sound in a performance review?
Well, instead of hearing you identified a process failure, you're told you are being too intense. You aren't maintaining quality standards. You are lacking collaborative spirit.
Man, that's wild. How widespread is this specific brand of toxicity? Are we talking about a few bad apples in highly competitive industries, or is this a broader structural issue?
The data is honestly pretty alarming. Surveys of the U.S. workforce consistently show that around 25% of people flag their workplace culture as actively toxic.
A quarter of the workforce.
Yeah. And when you look at mission-driven or highly hierarchical fields, the numbers skyrocket.
Like where?
Well, in healthcare, for instance, the research notes that roughly 40 to 50% of physicians experience this kind of abusive behavior.
Wait, half of our doctors are dealing with this. That is terrifying. Why is it so concentrated in those areas?
The research points to very specific drivers. It thrives in environments with weak accountability, where leaders face, zero consequences for subjective punitive behavior.
Right.
It also spikes during resource scarcity. When budgets are tight, people start viewing every single interaction as a zero-sum competition.
That makes sense.
But the primary driver, like the engine behind all of this, is insecure leadership. If a manager lacks the core competencies to actually lead, they view highly capable subordinates as a threat rather than an asset.
Okay, I'm struggling with this premise just a little bit. I need to play devil's advocate here.
Sure, go for it.
Because I have worked with people who think they're absolute rock stars, but they are incredibly arrogant and just, refuse to compromise.
Oh, absolutely. The brilliant
Yeah.
jerks.
Yes. So how do we know the person whining about competence pathologization isn't just a brilliant jerk who refuses to take legitimate feedback?
I am so glad you brought that up because it is the exact defense insecure managers use. The research clearly differentiates between managing a difficult personality and active gaslighting.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you are a brilliant jerk, a healthy organization will give you procedural feedback. They will sit you down and say, your technical output is in the top 10%, but you interrupted your colleagues 4 times in the last meeting and you missed the deadline on the collaborative report.
Ah, so it's specific.
Exactly. Here are the specific, measurable behavioral standards you are failing to meet.
So it's tied to an objective reality. There is a clear path to fix the behavior, and the ultimate goal is to, I assume, keep the talent in the building.
Precisely. But in a toxic culture experiencing competence pathologization, the goal isn't to develop the employee at all.
Then what is the goal?
The goal is to protect the leader's ego and, to insulate the status quo from uncomfortable accountability. So the feedback is intentionally vague and unprovable.
Like the too intense comments.
Right, you get told you're just not seeing the big picture or you aren't a cultural fit. It's a defensive maneuver designed to make the employees second-guess their own reality.
Which brings us to a massive contradiction, I think. Because if this behavior is so toxic and it is actively driving away the most talented people, why do executive boards let these insecure managers stay in power?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. I mean, why doesn't the free market just crush these companies?
Because the financial bleeding is almost entirely hidden. The paper breaks down the staggering organizational cost of this dynamic. Replacing a high performer doesn't just cost their salary.
How much are we talking?
The research estimates it costs the company up to 200% of that person's annual salary to replace them.
Wait, 200%. Walk me through that math. That sounds incredibly high for a single employee.
You have to factor in the entire life cycle of the turnover. First, you have the hard costs of recruitment and interviewing.
Sure.
Then you have the vacancy period, the months where that high-level work simply isn't getting done, which means, lost revenue or delayed product launches.
Yeah, that adds up.
Then you hire someone new, and it takes them 6 to 9 months just to reach the baseline productivity of the person who left.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the ramp-up time.
Exactly. But the biggest hidden cost is the depletion of institutional knowledge. The paper highlights an incredible example from the Cleveland Clinic in the early 2010s.
Oh, what happened there?
They experienced a massive exodus of highly talented academic surgeons. I mean, these are brilliant, incredibly expensive, highly trained individuals.
Right. Top-tier talent.
And they weren't leaving for better pay. They were fleeing a hostile environment where asking necessary, complex questions about medical procedures was being treated by administration as insubordination.
That is wild. Did the hospital leadership know what was happening?
Not initially. Executive leadership didn't even realize the scope of the problem until they sat down, quantified the turnover costs of these specific surgeons, and tracked the simultaneous drop in their innovation metrics.
So they were basically bleeding out and didn't know it.
Yes, they were losing their competitive edge because their culture punished the exact people trying to maintain their medical standards.
Man. Well, if you are a listener dealing with this, it's validating to hear about the corporate bottom line, but the individual cost is what really keeps you up at night.
Absolutely. The personal toll is immense.
There is a story in the research about a former banking executive named Sarah Chen that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. It's a devastating case study. So Sarah Chen left a highly toxic financial institution for a much healthier company.
All right.
But she reported that it took her 2 full years in her new role to stop second-guessing every single suggestion she made. She had completely internalized the previous toxic narrative.
2 whole years.
Yeah. She genuinely believed her high standards were unrealistic and that she was a disruptive presence.
It's essentially psychological conditioning.
It is. And the paper details how that psychological erosion actually manifests physically. Sustained exposure to gaslighting and competence pathologization forces the human body into a prolonged fight-or-flight state.
Because you're always on edge.
Exactly. Your cortisol levels stay chronically elevated because you are constantly scanning for political landmines. Over time, this allostatic load correlates with severe physiological impacts.
Like what?
We're talking cardiovascular disease, profound immune suppression, and symptoms that clinically mirror post-traumatic stress disorder.
So essentially what an organization is doing here is creating a system of, reverse Darwinism.
Reverse Darwinism. I like that.
Yeah, the company actively selects for mediocrity. The most capable people, the high performers who actually have options in the job market, they just pack up and leave first.
Right.
And who is left behind? Only the people who are willing to lower their standards, stay quiet, and survive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, You can see exactly how this reverse Darwinism completely kills organizational innovation,
Oh, for sure.
because survival in the modern market requires continuous improvement. And to improve, you need employees who are willing to point out current flaws and champion new ways of doing things.
But if your culture labels the people who advocate for change as difficult, your early warning systems just fail.
Completely. Employees just stop flagging safety concerns, they stop reporting quality gaps on the assembly line.
Because if raising a concern invites a personal attack on your character, information just stops flowing upward.
Exactly. And small, entirely fixable problems just quietly metastasize into full-blown public crises.
Okay, the diagnosis makes total sense. The problem is real, the hidden costs are devastating, and the toll on the human body is severe. But how do we actually fix this?
That's the real challenge.
I mean, how do organizations move beyond just like printing "we value integrity" on a poster in the break room to actually building hard infrastructure that protects their high performers?
Well, the research highlights several evidence-based structural solutions. It is entirely about moving from vague corporate values to procedural justice. A great example of this is Pixar Animation Studios and their famous brain trust process.
Oh, the brain trust. This is where directors show their messy, work-in-progress films to a room full of their peers for intense critique, right?
Yes, but the critical structural element of the brain trust is how it manages human psychology. When someone critiques our work, our brains naturally process it as a social threat. We get defensive.
Right. Nobody likes being told their idea is bad.
Exactly. Pixar circumvents this by enforcing a structure where the feedback is focused entirely on the film, not on the filmmaker's intelligence or worth. They deliberately separate the task from the ego.
That's smart.
The director is explicitly told, "You are not your film." This creates a psychologically safe space for incredibly rigorous critique without triggering toxic defensive reactions.
Okay, so Pixar fixes this in a highly creative, collaborative environment. But what about high-stakes environments? I mean, you can't just pause for a brain trust while a patient is dying on an operating table or while a commercial jet is experiencing engine failure.
Actually, you can, and the U.S. Navy proved it with something called Crew Resource Management, or CRM.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Navy realized that their traditional rigid hierarchical cultures in aircraft cockpits were literally causing fatal accidents. Junior crew members were noticing critical errors, but they were too afraid of the career repercussions to speak up and override a senior pilot.
Because pointing out an error to a senior officer was viewed as insubordination.
Exactly. So the Navy overhauled their entire operational infrastructure. They implemented training that explicitly expects and requires lower status crew members to challenge senior decision-making when it comes to safety protocols.
Wow.
They gave junior staff the formalized vocabulary and the mandatory duty to speak up. They overrode the traditional hierarchy to save lives, and their accident rates dropped significantly.
So they basically made candor a mandatory part of the job description.
Exactly.
That's incredible. The paper also brings up Cummins Inc., a major manufacturing company, and how they tackled this through procedural justice. Procedural justice meaning taking the manager's personal feelings completely out of the equation and relying on cold, hard, documented proof.
That is the core of it. Cummins implemented highly structured feedback protocols. Under their system, if a manager wants to give critical feedback to an employee, they can't just walk into HR and say, "This person is too intense." The infrastructure forbids it. The manager has to provide specific behavioral observations, document the timeline, explain the business impact, and have the entire package reviewed by HR for consistency across the department.
That is amazing.
Yeah, by forcing that level of evidence-based assessment, Cummins reduced their subjective employee grievances by 40%. They systemically removed the ambiguity where gaslighting normally thrives.
So if you are listening to this right now and you're constantly getting vague feedback like you're too intense or you don't fit the vibe, take a page out of Cummins' book. Force your manager to document specific behavioral examples.
That's great advice.
Because if they can't produce a single objective metric, you aren't failing, you're being gaslit.
Right on the money.
Okay, let's unpack this a little further because the paper also mentions Amazon's famous protocol, disagree and commit.
Ah, yes.
The idea that you passionately argue your point, but once a decision is made by leadership, everyone drops their ego and gets on board. How do you stop a rule like disagree and commit from just becoming a very polite weapon for a bad boss?
What do you mean?
Like, what stops an insecure manager from saying, I hear your disagreement. Thank you for sharing. Now shut up and commit to doing it my way.
That is the profound danger of adopting the slogan without building the infrastructure. For disagree and commit to actually function without becoming toxic,
Yeah.
there has to be procedural fairness.
Right. It can't just be a buzzword.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There must be genuine, documented two-way dialogue first. The employee's perspective has to be rigorously debated, not just given token acknowledgement while the manager waits to speak.
Right.
Furthermore, there needs to be an explicit mapping of decision authority before the disagreement ever happens.
Meaning everyone in the room knows exactly who has the power to make the final call before the meeting even starts.
Precisely. If the criteria for the decision are transparent and the debate is fair, high-performing people will readily commit even to decisions they fundamentally disagree with. They just want to know the process was intellectually honest.
Yeah, they want to feel heard.
But if disagree and commit is just deployed to silence valid concerns without genuine consideration, it's just toxicity wearing a corporate buzzword.
Man, this all hinges on the final piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Leadership. Because all the procedural infrastructure in the world won't save a company if the people at the top are actively ignoring it.
Absolutely true.
How are top companies actually rewiring their leadership layer to stop crushing their best talent?
Well, it requires a massive structural shift in how an organization views the fundamental role of a leader. Look at Microsoft's transformation under CEO Satya Nadella.
Oh, yeah, they had a huge turnaround.
Huge. When he took over, the culture was famously combative. It was a know-it-all environment where managers succeeded by projecting absolute certainty and dominating their subordinates.
Which is an absolute breeding ground for insecure managers suppressing anyone who dares to ask a hard question.
Exactly. But Nadella systematically dismantled that. He shifted the culture to a collaborative, learn-it-all mindset. And he didn't just put it on a poster. He changed how leaders were evaluated.
How so?
Managers were actively coached and assessed on their ability to demonstrate curiosity, to publicly acknowledge their own knowledge gaps, and to treat challenges to their thinking as gifts rather than threats.
That's a massive shift.
And that top-down reprogramming helped drive Microsoft's market value from $300 billion to over $2 trillion.
Wow. Compare that deliberate reprogramming to what happened at Uber in 2017. They experienced a complete cultural meltdown.
Oh, yeah, it was a mess.
And the paper points out that they actually had all the early warning signs. Their internal inclusion surveys were tanking, attrition of top talent was high, the HR hotline was ringing, but leadership just ignored the data.
They ignored it because there was no structural incentive to care, until the crisis became so public that the board of directors had to intervene.
Right.
Their ultimate solution was to implement board-level quarterly cultural health reviews. But the vital mechanism there was tying those cultural metrics directly to executive compensation.
Yes. Because evaluating an executive purely on their profit margins while completely ignoring the psychological safety of their team is, it's like rating a restaurant purely on how the food tastes, but completely ignoring that the kitchen is currently on fire.
That's a great analogy.
Sure, the food is hot right now, and the reviews look great on paper, but the kitchen is melting from the inside out, and catastrophic failure isn't just a possibility, it is mathematically inevitable.
Exactly. And this raises an important question about how organizations actively distribute power to keep those kitchens from burning down.
Right. How do you stop one bad chef from ruining everything?
Well, if one single manager holds absolute unchecked power over an employee's daily life, their compensation, and their career trajectory, toxicity will inevitably flourish.
So how do progressive companies break up that monopoly on power?
They decentralize the authority. Adobe, for example, shifted to a team-centered leadership model where they actively rotate the facilitators of their innovation teams.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it detaches the leader's ego from the specific outcome, making them far less defensive when new ideas are proposed. And Deloitte completely overhauled their performance management system.
What did they do?
They ditched the dreaded annual review, where an employee gets ambushed with a year's worth of vague, hoarded complaints in favor of ongoing, forward-looking development conversations with multiple stakeholders.
So it removes the element of surprise.
Exactly.
The paper also highlights a really innovative program at Intermountain Healthcare. They offer something called professional sustainability consultations.
Yes. This is a brilliant structural safety net. If an employee is struggling with their culture, they can seek out confidential coaching to answer the exact question we started with.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a me problem where I need to develop new skills? Or is this an environment problem where the culture is actively toxic?
And because it's confidential, it completely removes the stigma of asking for help. It supports the individual, but it also gives the organization incredible macro level data, right? Because if 5 high-performing employees from the exact same department all secretly go to coaching, the organization suddenly knows exactly where a toxic leader is hiding.
That's the brilliance of it. It creates systemic visibility.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the whole picture, the journey we've taken today tells us this. Competence pathologization is a very real, very dangerous phenomenon.
It truly is.
It is incredibly expensive to the corporate bottom line. It destroys the mental and physical health of brilliant people, and it actively selects for mediocrity by driving away top talent. But it is entirely fixable.
Yes.
With the right structural accountability, fair processes, and leaders who are evaluated on their curiosity rather than their dominance, organizations can stop punishing their best people.
It really all comes down to a fundamental threshold question. It is the question the paper poses directly, and it's the question I would ask you, the listener, to deeply consider right now. Are you struggling at work because you are genuinely incapable, or are you struggling because you've spent way too long in an environment that actively benefits from your self-doubt?
Man, that is the ultimate question.
And I want to leave you with one final thought on that, particularly if you work in a mission-driven field.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you are in healthcare, teaching, social work, or the nonprofit sector, we constantly hear about compassion fatigue and burnout. But consider the mechanics of what we've discussed today.
Right.
What if the burnout you are feeling has nothing to do with the actual work? What if it is the heavy, cumulative physiological toll of having your competence, your passion, and your high standards repeatedly weaponized against you? Maybe you aren't burned out on the mission itself. Maybe you're just exhausted by the gaslighting.
Wow. That just reframes everything. If you are listening to this and nodding along, remember the speeding ticket. Trust your own capability, keep your eyes on your own dashboard, and keep asking the hard questions, even if the system tries to pull you over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.